You're listening to Rally DNA.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of the Rally DNA podcast. This week, myself and Killian are fortunate enough to have a fantastic guest in the form of Lewis, the creator of the wonderful WRC Wings website. And Lewis is going to talk us through some of the key changes in the aerodynamic regulations this year compared to last, and how each of the teams is setting about recapturing some of the lost aerodynamic performance from last year.
Welcome along, Lewis.
Hello, thank you very much for your invitation. Really honored to be part of your podcast and happy to participate, really.
Thank you very much, mate.
So, but before we get into the murky waters of aerodynamic devices on rally cars, could you tell us a little bit about WRC Wings itself and what led you to start up this project and what your aims are with it?
Yes, well, I've always been a passionate of rallying and aerodynamics. And well, in a certain moment, I found out that many people was talking about aerodynamics of Formula 1, aerodynamics of resistance cars, other specialties, but nobody talked about aerodynamics in rallying. And I thought that it was worth enough to devote some efforts to try to explain how aerodynamics in a rally car are done and how engineers prepare the aerodynamics, because, well, I think that the more information you have about any competition, the more you enjoy it. No? And I thought that I could try to explain a little bit for average fan some principles behind these aerodynamic parts of the cars, and then that was my contribution to people to enjoy a little bit more the rallying competition. No? I started by posting some images in a website. Then I started adding some words, and from there in late 2015 to the point we are today with very developed aerodynamics in the last generation of cars. So really enjoying that.
It must have been quite fortuitous that the website began to take off just as the 2017 era cars came in.
Yeah, it was the right moment, and now I see it. At that moment, I didn't know, but it was the right moment because I was fortunate enough to track all the development carried out in 2016, and then the first images of the new cars at the beginning of 2017, and from there, all the development in the last 5 years, which has been really, really interesting. And now we are dealing with a new generation with different features, different characteristics, but also very interesting also.
Certainly no shortage of bits to talk about over the last 5-6 years in terms of advances and changes in aerodynamics and rallying, for sure. And speaking for myself, I must say it's a really great website. It's been more than useful in preparing for a couple of episodes on this podcast. I'll say that much. And it's a great resource to rally fans, certainly from my point of view.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
And just quickly to add to that, I think your commitment to writing and delivering content without resorting to sort of maths formulas is particularly impressive, considering the subject matter lends itself to maths, and it's fantastically able to sort of convey the info without going down that road too deeply.
Yeah, we try to escape from any formula, any equation, because the goal is to make it understandable for an average fan. So try to make it as simple as possible. Sometimes some purist aerodynamicists complain about simplifications we have to do, but I think it's a pay-we-pay satisfactorily, because our goal is to make it understandable, not to be strictly precise and no.
You've certainly achieved that, because my knowledge of aerodynamics sort of begins and ends with how an aircraft gets off the ground, and that a brick isn't aerodynamic at all. So it's very accessible, I might say, certainly.
Well, it's not a bad starting point.
It's something, I guess.
Yes.
So, Lewis, over to you, really. I mean, would you sort of talk to us about your initial thoughts about the initial development of those 2017 cars from an aerodynamic standpoint?
Yes, I think that the 2017 WRC car generation, nobody can deny that it's probably the most developed in terms of aerodynamics rally car generation. No? You can think about the old Group B cars, which were already very good, very well developed in terms of aerodynamics. But don't forget that on that time they used wind tunnels sometimes, but the numerical simulation techniques were still very poor. Also, in the introduction of WRC cars at the end of the 90s and beginning of the 2000s, sorry, we had also very good aerodynamic developments, but again, the numerical simulation techniques were not as developed as we have now. And also the degree of freedom that engineers had on that time was not as big as the degree of freedom that Federation planned for 2017. No? So I think to summarize the two main characteristics of the 2017 generation is, one, the high level of advance of the numerical simulation techniques, what we all know as CFD or computational fluid dynamics, and also the addition of new elements never seen before in rally cars. Sometimes in resistant cars on DTM, but you have never seen before in a rally car a rear diffuser, dive planes at the front, fender bends even. So these two characteristics, I think that can allow us to affirm that this was the most developed generation of rally cars in terms of aerodynamics. No? Then, at the end of this generation, the Federation planned new set of regulations for 2022, and well, this new set of regulations has brought that to the cars that we have now. No? Behind these new regulations, there was a clear intention of reducing cost, and reducing cost meant reducing cost during the engineering stage, so less time, less resources devoted to design the new cars, and also less cost in terms of replacing the aero parts that you can see in many stages are broken and the cars miss them, so it's very expensive to replace them.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the amount of focus that was placed upon let's say the dive planes and things in the last generation, 27 to 2021, how much of a contributing factor overall was that to the overall performance of the cars?
Well, it's difficult to say a percentage, but I'll put it in another words. When you look at the 2017 WRC cars, especially during the last year, you can see that there were a lot of aero parts at the front of the car, as well as a big rear wing, big rear diffuser, combined with the exhaust blown, which we can talk later. But you could see that they were cars that were very well balanced in terms of aerodynamics, okay? Dive planes, the winglets on top of the front fenders, and also the end plates on the dive planes were very critical to generate downforce at the front. So the main difference or the main role of these parts is that they contributed not only to generate downforce, but to make the car much more stable, because you are balancing the front downforce with the rear downforce that the rear wing and the rear diffuser were able to generate. Okay.
Presumably that reduced understeer by quite a lot as well. For
yes. As soon as you get a similar amount of downforce, and maybe before we should continue, we should talk about downforce, but as soon as you get the same or similar amount of downforce, the front wheels and the rear wheels, the four wheels have similar traction, so the four wheels behave similarly. No? If you make the car unbalanced and you put all the pressure or the downforce at the rear, you make that the front wheels lose traction, so they become understeering. And on the contrary, if you put a lot of pressure or a lot of downforce at the front of the car, the rear wheels lose traction and then become oversteering. No? And at the end, this is what, when we talk about aerodynamics, we're talking normally about downforce. This is the way that to get the air from the airflow to get some force that pushes the car down to the road in order to get better traction, so the wheels work better. They are able to supply better the energy from the engine, and that's what we are looking for when we talk about aerodynamics. The only thing is that you have to get this downforce balanced, or you'll get oversteering or understeering, and also you don't have to significantly increase the air resistance of the car when you get this extra downforce. Okay, you could use a very huge rear wing inside the measures of the regulations. You could use many parts, but if these parts increase the air resistance, the drag, you are gaining downforce, but you're losing top speed. So at the end, it's always a balance. No, I can add a little more drag, but I have to get a lot of downforce to compensate. No? So
and there was anecdotes, went around because with that generation of cars that there was actually so much downforce and grip being generated by the aerodynamics towards the end of the life of those regulations that in certain rallies they were leading to such a disintegration of the road surface as well, because there was so much grip in places like Finland at speed. By the time the WRC2 cars were coming along, there was such massive degradation of the surface because the cars had so much grip. They were being forced so heavily into the road that they're creating huge ruts that were just never seen before, because you could see the effect of it on nature, as it were.
Yes, and not only this, but also you have to think on the tire wear because of the higher force they have to deal with. You have to think also in suspension settings. So aerodynamics has a lot of consequences over the car behavior and over the car wear, or reliability. So reaching so high level of downforce was really nice in order to see the cars going so fast over the fast corners, but also had some consequences that had to be keep in mind also. No?
You mentioned cost also, Lewis. The very attritional nature of rallying itself and all these complicated, expensive, aerodynamic appendages, front wings, rear wings, splitters, defenders. We've seen all these things being ripped apart and torn off on stages, and pictures from the service park of stacks of damaged bodywork. Just how much were teams spending on this? Because obviously these are complicated materials, composites, but now they're more complicated again by the addition of the aerodynamic parts. So, what were teams actually spending on all of this? Because it must have been a huge cost.
It depends on the part, but there are some parts that cost several tens of euros. So losing them, several of them during a rally for the budget of the team is not is significant. Maybe the dive planes, which were smaller, maybe could cost 5,000-6,000 euros, but a rear wing, rear diffuser, the front splitter, these parts are really expensive. So I can understand why the federation with the new regulations tried to reduce these costs. No?
Absolutely.
Could you give us an idea of which team you consider to have made the most use of the regulations in terms of aero over the spread of 2017 to 2021? Because it's clear to see from the naked eye that all the cars evolved came on in leaps and bounds from an aerodynamic point of view over the course of those 5 years. But from your professional opinion or your studied opinion, which would you say, which team made the most use of the freedom that they were given?
Well, I think from my point of view, Toyota from the very beginning, took more advantage of the freedom of the regulations in 2017. And if you look at the whole period, you can see that after the end of the first year, they introduced some modifications at the front of the car. But from then to the end of the period, they only had to introduce some very minor modifications, some addition at the front at the beginning of 2021. But during the whole period was the kind of stability, which means that the design of the car was good enough or very good. No? And if you look at the other teams, Hyundai did a very good job, but during the whole 5 years. So at the end, they had a very competitive car in terms of aerodynamics, very similar in terms of performance to the Toyota, and sometimes even better. Ford did a very compact design, but they only had to do some very small modifications during this 5 years period, but I think it was a little bit more conservative. Their main goal was to keep the car reliable, so not to lose many parts during the stages. And Citroën did not introduce any significant aero modifications. They keep working on several different packages, but they never introduced any of them. The last one in 2019 at the end was very nice, very complex, but they retired before having the chance to introduce it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I completely forgotten the completely updated C3 WRC that we were teased with briefly, and then we never really got to see in Driven in Anger. We never got to see Driven in Anger, just the test. And by all accounts, that seemed to make quite a big difference. I mean, maybe it's one of these great what might have beens.
Yes, they introduced a third dive plane, which nobody had done it before, and nobody did it. And some end plates, big end plates on the rear wing was similar in design to the Toyota. So I had the chance to be in that test here in Catalonia, and then they tested also in Finland, and the package looked very nice, but fortunately too late.
And there was another car we didn't get to see, but we did see a photo of it in recent weeks, fully liveried. 2017 Polo, which we did discuss on our first episode with one of the engineers who was involved in the program. Certainly a lot tamer, if you could use such a word, in the aerodynamic stakes, or maybe, tame maybe is the best way that I can describe it, compared to what we saw from Toyota right out of the gates. A much more conservative approach, probably a better way of putting it. How much of a deficit do you think that car would have been? Now, no doubt, Volkswagen, we saw that team's success, they would have quickly gotten to grips with it if the program had continued. There's quite a big difference between what we saw on the initial Yaris, what that Polo 2017 car would have been. They would have had a lot of catching up to do, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure they would have expended quickly some jokers in that car because the design was really conservative. It's clear they came from a very dominant situation, so they were not the one who had to take too many risks. But I'm sure that the lack of front dive planes, for instance, it was one of the things that once the drivers would have started complaining about understeering, they had quickly introduced them. Also, the fender vents, the ones that the car included were really simple, something like the initial fender vents of the Hyundai. And I'm sure during the next year, they would have introduced modifications at this level, at least.
And I know by their very nature, these things always work as a package, hence aerodynamic package. But would it be fair to say that the dive planes were the most significant aerodynamic single addition from that period in terms of overall performance?
Together with the rear diffuser. The rear diffuser gives you a huge amount of downforce if you design it well, and combined with the exhaust gas. If you remember, all cars except Hyundai placed the exhaust gas on top of the rear diffuser and in a centered position. That means that they were able to get the energy from the exhaust gases to remove even more air from the rear diffuser, so making the rear diffuser more effective in removing air. And the more air you remove from under the car, the better, because you are reducing the pressure under the car.
Would that be a blown diffuser?
Exhaust blown diffuser, yes. Mm-hmm. It's similar concept like in Formula One.
And is it a similar concept with the vents above the front wing to sort of extricate the air from underneath?
You mean a front wing?
I mean the front fenders in the ones above on the top of the wing themselves.
The wing on top of the front fenders.
Yes, the winglets.
Yes, well, the only thing is that they were so small that the amount of downforce they were able to generate was not so significant. But as soon as drivers keep complaining about understeering, engineers had to look for additional solutions. No? So they increased the size of the front fender vents. Toyota also forced some air to flow upwards. They placed a deflector on top of the fender in order to avoid mixing the two streams of air. Well, different solutions in order to get the car stuck, the front of the car stuck to the road.
I suppose it also says something that after 5 years, most of the teams began to coalesce around the sort of Toyota model, the idea that extreme aero was worth going for, was worth spending and investing in. And presumably that wasn't decided upon back in 2017. There was still scope for perhaps this aero thing will be, yes, important, but not the deciding factor, which it clearly became because Toyota was incredibly effective and visually the most extreme from an aerodynamic point of view.
Yeah. The results were critical, were crucial, but also the thing is that the Toyota was the fastest car on the fastest events. This means the aerodynamic package was really good, no? Because it's there when the aerodynamic package shows the difference, or makes the difference. If you are fast in Sardinia, okay, maybe you have a reliable car, but you don't need very well-developed aerodynamics. But if you are fast in Finland, you are fast in Australia or in Sweden, it means that your aerodynamic package is good. That's clear. So other teams, especially Hyundai had a fast car on the medium and low speed events, but on the fast events, remember they never won in Finland. For instance, in Sweden, Neville won once, but they had always problems. So the thing was to get a fast car in the fastest events.
You're right. That Yaris never looked more at home than in Sweden and Finland, did it? I mean, that first victory straight out the box for Jari Matti in 2017 really did point the way.
Yeah, that's critical.
Would you say the Citroen again? We to go back to the C3. Would you say a lot of its struggles could be attributed to its aero design, or was it an overall flawed package? I do know that the damper has got a lot of flack, but would you say had it had a better aerodynamic package, would we have seen a leap from the performance of that vehicle?
It's difficult to say. I think most of the problems, because the number of jokers that they spend on came from the suspension side. They spent a lot of jokers on that, and Max Rosberg changed different things. Then arrived Sebastian Ogier and changed again different things. Chris Mick. So maybe the aerodynamic package was perfectible, surely, but the fact that nobody changed it probably confirms that the issues were on another side. No? More
bigger fish to fry. So moving on to the new cars or the current cars, I've seen an FIA figure of they wanted to decrease aerodynamic performance by 15%. I don't know whether that's the case, whether that's ever been the case, because you know what engineers are like. I'm sure they'd have found ways to negate that from the get-go. But would you tell us a little bit more about the core principles of the current cars from an aerodynamic point of view, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's difficult to to concrete a figure, and for sure during the years this figure will be reduced. But the impact on aerodynamics of the new regulations are significant, and maybe the results or the speed we are seeing in the stages of the events we have seen to date. There is a combined effect of a reduced aerodynamics and the extra power supplied by the hybrid unit. So when we talk about what these regulations did about aerodynamics of the rally cars, we have to think on two parts. One part is that they decided to trim several parts, and I mean those parts that made the 2017 rally cars characteristic, like dive planes, winglets on top of the front fenders, fender end plates, fender vents, all these parts that were designed specifically to generate downforce at the front has been forbidden, has been trimmed. And if you look at the three cars, they look really very similar at the front. They keep the front splitter, which is still usual, but all the other parts have been forbidden. So clearly, these new regulations are going to bring less downforce at the front, more on the steering. And also the other piece, which was characteristic, the rear diffuser, has been also trimmed. So in all cases, engineers had to think about alternative solutions. We will cover them later. And the other big thing was the introduction of the hybrid unit, which you may think, okay, this affects the power, but not. This has a lot of aerodynamic implications because, okay, you have extra power, but to generate this extra power, you generate heat. You have to remove the heat. You have to add weight to the car because of the unit, because of the radiators. You are changing the weight distribution of the car. So a lot of implications on the aerodynamics. We will go one by one, but for the engineers, I think this has been the major headache during the last year, during the design, not only the performance or the working procedure of the hybrid unit, but also all the implications involved in the introduction of this unit.
It's certainly the one we can see evolving probably most obviously before our eyes is the challenge that the cooling has presented and what they're trying to do to offset issues in different events, and to trial and error being seen exactly before our eyes.
Yes, well, taking into account that they received the hybrid unit, if I'm not wrong, end of March last year. Ford started the first test with the hybrid unit, but during the year, the number of tests was not very high. And especially on very high and very hot conditions, there was not a lot of tests. I think the teams were more worried about the procedure of operating the hybrid unit rather than testing the performance at the worst conditions. No? So they arrived to Monte Carlo this year with a unit that probably was not evaluated sufficiently in such bad conditions. And the thing is that engineers took some conservative decision that incorporating some side scoops in order to force air to enter into the car. This is an alternative. If you look at the previous generation of rallycross supercars, you will see that all of them have, most of them has rear cooling also, and they don't have scoops. They have some side inlets, which are not prominent, and some of them, like the Audi, for instance, have also inlets on the roof. Okay, so, but in the WRC, the Rally1 cars, engineers all decided to include the scoops. Okay, introducing the scoop has a lot of implications in the aerodynamics because depending on whether you locate the scoop, you will receive more or less air. So it may affect your cooling performance, but also you will adding extra surface of the car means you are adding more resistance to the air because you have increased the surface of the car, and also you have modified the shape of the car. So at the end, the aerodynamic drag coefficient of the car, I'm sure that has increased with these scoops. This means additional drag, no? Not only because of the area, but also because of the shape. And also, depending on whether you locate the scoop, you may affect the efficiency of the rear wing, because you are adding an obstacle into an airflow, which normally goes to the sides of the rear wings. And as we can see, for instance, in the Puma or in the Hyundai i20N, they have small wings on both sides of the wing, which are designed specifically to take advantage of the airflow, of the air flowing on both sides of the car. So if you place a scoop on that position, you may be affecting the rear wing efficiency. No? So this is a big implication of the scoops. And also another implication is that you need fresh air into the scoop and fresh air into clean air into the rear wing. But you have to put side mirrors by regulation. That's why engineers, and Toyota is the clear example, during last year, the Toyota did not use any side wing during the test. And it was only in mid-January that they introduced these wing mirrors, they call it, that are really separated from the body of the car. Okay, and this is designed in order not to introduce an obstacle on the current of air flowing to the side scoop. No? So in order to cool down a radiator at the rear of the car, look at how many things you have to change and what are the implications. No?
I mean, it's so fascinating for many reasons, but also for the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, some teams have been far more conservative than others, and they've all been quite conservative, presumably because it's a learning exercise. And we're used to, certainly I'm used to seeing, top tier motorsport where the engineers have everything worked out from the very beginning, and the data is there for them to work with, and so there's no fact finding that can be seen in front of your eyes. Whereas because testing is limited and because budgets are so limited, we are, as Killian said, watching this stuff evolve before our very eyes. The cooling scoops are getting smaller, as your wonderful website made clear, presumably as the teams are playing with the amount of heat the amount of cooling air the hybrid unit needs in actuality, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, this year the problem is that the testing days are very limited and are limited to the place where the event is going to take place some weeks before. No, so now they can test they tested in Sardinia because Rally Sardinia, and then there they found very hot conditions, and probably they will test before Safari Rally in Portugal or in Sardinia again, and again they will find some hot conditions. But before preparing Monte Carlo, preparing Sweden, preparing Croatia, there was no opportunity to test the system under these conditions. So probably the solution was to start with a conservative design, ensure that the hybrid unit works at the right temperatures, because don't forget that if the hybrid unit reaches excess temperature, it stops working. So the driver loses the extra power. So you have to ensure that the hybrid unit works. And then before summer or during summer, you can use one joker to improve it. But the test that we are seeing seems to go in the sense that the system is really conservative, so they can reduce the size of the scoop. No? The question before could have been that there was not enough fresh air, no? And then we would have seen bigger scoops. But it seems it's not the case, but because we have seen in Sardinia that Toyota was able to block almost completely the side scoop. So whether they have another cooling system inside that we don't know, or their system is so efficient that with such a small amount of air is able to keep the working temperatures steadily. No?
I was worried in the lead up to Sardinia that with all this talk of the heat wave and the high temperatures that we would see, these issues really come to the fore. But in fairness, we didn't really see much issues with hybrid in Sardinia whatsoever. And particularly, as you say, that Toyota have stuff blocked up so much. I was kind of, wrinkling my forehead going, oh, this could be a bad move here with this 40-degree plus heat. But here we go. It seems to be working. Or unless, as you say, there's something we can't see. which is always likely on some level. But there you go.
Toyota and hidden pieces.
Well, you said it, not me. If you're listening, Toyota, no accusations. Just yeah.
Yeah, and also there was the issue with the extra heat inside the car because of the presence of the exhaust pipe on one side of the car. No? Well, it was really a good test for these kind of things, except Craig Green. Nobody else complained about hybrid unit issues. And well, drivers complain about high temperatures inside the car, but I think that not very differently from other years. No?
Moving to the rear of the car, presumably the lack of aerodynamic freedom at the front has placed even more importance on what's left of the diffuser. Have we seen teams spending more time and resources on the development of that to sort of extract more performance from it?
Yes. You have to compensate for the lack of the rear diffuser because you need to remove the air from under the car. And there has been two philosophies during this design period. One is Toyota. Toyota, what has done is to increase the rake of the car. Regulations allow a rake of 8 degrees. So what you do is to elevate the rear of the car and reduce the ride height at the front. This means that you are reducing the amount of air that is able to enter under the car at the front, but at the rear, the air loses some speed, so the effect is more pronounced at the front of the car. And the other philosophy, which I think also is very interesting, is the design of the rear of the Hyundai i20. If you look, well, we have talked about the implications of the hybrid, the cooling system of the hybrid unit, but there was also one advantage, that you get air that you have to remove from the car. You get some fans attached to the rear radiator, so you can get use of this force, this energy. Okay, and Hyundai has done it very well because they have placed now the exhaust at the center of the rear bumper, in opposition to what they have done in the previous generation. And they have placed the two vents of the air coming from the cooling system on both sides of the exhaust. So what they do is a very homogeneous distribution of air exiting from the rear bumper, which helps to remove a little bit the air coming from below the car. Okay, so it's not an exhaust blown diffuser, but it's certain. We can talk about blown diffuser, homogeneous blown diffuser. No, you don't have so much energy as you have in the exhaust pipe, but okay, you still have energy from the radiator fans and in the center from the exhaust gas. No? So this is a very interesting design. Toyota, instead of that, what has done is to put the two fans on top of the rear bumper instead of in the center of the rear bumper. The exits are on top of the rear bumper. But what Toyota has is that they have found a solution to an alternative to the rear fender vents. Okay, in this case, you have the problem that you don't have rear fender vents. So you have the problem of removing the air from the wheel space, which is causing high pressure, especially because most of the vents, they are using the pipe, the cooling system pipes, the corrugated pipes that are adding air to the wheel space. So you need to remove this air. Most of the cars, what they have done is to remove the side part of the fender. So you can see that the border of the fender is very thin, while before it was thick. So that you are leaving a space for air to be removed by this part. But Toyota has placed some orifice inside the rear wheel space. And this orifice connects to a pipe that appears on both sides of the fans located above the rear bumper. Regulation only says that any orifice you you don't have to be able to see the wheel through this orifice. And if you look through the orifices of the Toyota, you are not able to see the wheel, so they fulfill the regulations. But it's a smart solution because connecting this pipe from the rear wheel space to the rear radiator and the fan, you are extracting somehow air from the rear wheel, okay? So different alternatives, different philosophies, but everybody's trying desperately to get air from under the car.
Fascinating, because we're so early on. I assume over the next course of the next few years, we'll see a consensus of opinion start to form between the teams as to which is the best way to go about it. You know, and presumably we'll see the first year is when we'll see most divergence between the different aerodynamic philosophies of the three cars.
Yes, well, don't forget that anytime a team homologates a part, all the teams know about it. So it's not secret information once you homologate it. But yes, no doubt that the one that it works better, it will be the one that will be copied, no? Or at least try to get the philosophy, no? That's for sure.
And as you said, what are we, 5 rallies into this new regulations now? And already there's such an obvious difference as the cars are unloaded at each event. Because, oh, that's new already. Mm-hmm. And what's a car that isn't very dramatic now compared to its predecessor? So you can actually nearly pick out these changes that little bit easier. As well, which makes it more interesting to the more casual observer. I would be harder pressed to spot differences between events on the last generation cars. Yeah, I think it's certainly a little more obvious. Even like there's the simple thing like that mirror wasn't there before. Oh, that's a different shape mirror. You know, it's and there's not as much else going on to get it lost in the background. You know, so let's see what the rest of the year will bring, because we have plenty more rallies to go.
Yes, the thing that some parts like the side mirrors or the wing mirrors do not need to homologate, to be homologated, no? So you can easily change between events and improve and modify it. Other modifications already require to be homologated, and that's why they are not introduced so often. But I'm sure that before Estonia and Finland events, which are some of the fastest events of the year, if teams are planning to do some significant modifications and these modifications has been tested enough, I think that will be the moment to introduce them. Probably they can homologate them before 1st of July 1st, and then use it from these 2 events. That is where you can take more advantage of a new package. So it makes no sense to introduce it before Sardinia or Portugal, but there is the right moment, no? After that, okay, you have Greece, you have Spain, you have Japan, New Zealand, but probably most of the changes will be delayed for the next season, no? All the changes that are not introduced before Estonia and Finland, unless there is something very crucial.
Do you have any predictions as to how the teams will set about trying to evolve the aerodynamic devices they have over the next few years?
Well, one thing is the side scoops. I'm sure that we will see maybe at the end Toyota will remove completely or will introduce a small design. Hyundai, I don't think the design of the Hyundai side scoop is very, very discreet in the sense that the disturbance on the airflow is small. And maybe M Sport will also do some modifications because they have been testing different alternatives. I think I remember in the Portugal pre-event test, they tried blocking totally the side scoop and the lower scoop. So probably they are also working on that. And the other field, which I would expect to see some modifications, is at the front. I'm sure that it's very limited because of the new regulation, but as soon as the steering becomes critical, teams will start looking for some solution over there. No? Otherwise, what we have is cars that are not really well balanced. We have a very big rear wing. We have some alternative solutions for the rear diffuser. Okay, they don't perform so well as the rear diffuser, but still. But at the front, we only have the front splitter mainly, and the additional downforce that the front fender design can generate, but I think it's not enough. So probably we will see some modifications there, and you will see surely in Finland, in the long jumps in the stages of Finland, that these cars with so much downforce at the rear, also a modified weight distribution. When you have now more weight at the rear, you will see most of the cars nosing up in the long jumps. I think this is what I expect to see. Yeah, because there is nothing creating when your car is flying on a jump, the under car is not working, okay, but the elements on top of the car keep working, no? So the rear wing is working, the air is generating downforce at the rear, but if you don't have anything at the front or very small parts, then the car gets unbalanced. So it will be for the ability of the drivers to brake at the appropriate force in order to keep the cars balanced during the jump, but probably we will see some unbalanced jumps.
And presumably this is lent added importance to the front splitter, as you mentioned. How carefully worded are the FIA's description of what you're allowed to do to that front splitter? I'm sure it's very carefully written, so the teams can't just turn it into effectively what they had before.
Yeah, the FIA Federation doesn't supply too much information. So you have the rules, and sometimes for instance, in the rules you are not able to find the maximum width the rear wing can have. So information so basic that in Formula One, for instance, we know that the regulations that entered this year, 1 year before in Formula One were known. In rallying, it's not the same. We still don't know which is the maximum width of a rear wing. You know the maximum width of the car. That's all they publish. So they are not very, very transparent on this side. And this is a pity also about the homologation parts of the cars. We are in June and still they have not published any list of the homologated parts by any team. Maybe the list is short because it's only 5 or 6 months, but it's something that in other specialities you see very often. No, and in rallying, it's a problem. They are not, for me, they are not transparent enough. So they are not releasing enough information for people to enjoy competition as they could. No?
It's funny as you say, because generally speaking, like you pointed out in F1, this is so readily available to anyone with a quick Google search.
Yeah, and it's the same federation.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, it's, if it was a different federation, you could say, okay, I get that. But to be so clear and transparent and ahead of time and upfront with one, and then in another top flight motorsport category to be so almost deliberately vague and staying in the shadows.
Yes, I could understand in the previous generation because the cars were based on road cars, and I understand that the big companies want to keep their secrets secret. No? But now that we have cars based on tubular chassis and these kind of things, why not? Why don't you explain and give all the information so that people can judge and can enjoy the experience a lot better, no?
It will be fascinating to see how each of the teams sort of sets about recovering as much of this lost performance as possible. And would it be fair to say that we'll see the fronts of the cars becoming slightly more complex as the years go by? Obviously not as complex as they were at all last year, but presumably things will change from a frontal perspective.
Yeah, we will see, because if you followed the test during last year, some teams already introduced some modifications. I remember, for instance, M Sport, at the front of the Puma, they introduced some small fences on both sides, like the previous generation cars had. And at the end, they have been removed because the federation said, no, we don't want sophisticated parts at the front, sophisticated fence, no? But we will see. I'm sure engineers will find a way.
They always do.
Yes.
So where do you think we're going to see the biggest evolution for the rest of the year? Will it be something like the front, or is there, with the deliberate vagueness of the FIA and not leaving much room for maneuver in that area, is there some other part of the car that you think that the teams can exploit further that hasn't yet been exploited?
Well, no, I think that the front will take more than this year to get better development. The side scoops, or as we already mentioned, and well, maybe we could see some modifications at the rear, but for the moment, I think they are performing well. So
I think it's five rallies in, Lewis. So we're going to have to revisit this when we've seen some more changes to recap again, maybe at the end of the season.
Yeah, for sure, and for sure, engineers will surprise us. No? But
is there anything that you, in particular, from an aerodynamic standpoint, that you're looking forward to seeing how things play out? Any particular element?
Well, for instance, there was an element that was used in the previous generation, which were the wheel diffusers. As the same that we have a rear diffuser at the rear of the car. Some cars like the Hyundai or the Toyota used wheel diffusers, which is a small diffuser ahead of the rear wheels. So you reduce the drag because you generate some more downforce because it's a small diffuser, but also you reduce the drag because the air impacting over the rear wheel, the impact is different than if you don't have the wheel diffuser. No? This is something that Toyota and Hyundai used in the previous generation car, and now only M Sport is using this wheel diffuser, which I expect all cars to continue using it. And no, it's only M Sport who is using now. Also, some wheel deflectors. For instance, Citroën used wheel deflectors at the front and at the rear of the cars, also to reduce the drag, because if you avoid the airflow to impact over the rotating wheel, the drag is smaller. And well, it was M Sport also using that on the Fiesta and Citroën, but as far as I know, none of the current cars are using these small elements. And well, probably the solution of Toyota removing air from the rear wheels, it's something that other teams might consider, maybe not Hyundai, but possibly M Sport, because it's a smart solution. You see at the moment small details because regulations are so restrictive that difficult to say to go further.
I suppose it's also about teams working out their favoured relationship between peak downforce and aerodynamic drag as well, because all the things are basically settling upon the path of least resistance. You know, you're always going to suffer from one by robbing Peter to pay Paul, as it were.
Yeah, and if you remember in Sweden, one of the fastest stages in Sweden, we saw that the Hyundai was able to achieve top speeds around 10 kilometers per hour faster than the other two teams. Okay, there are many factors involved in this, the transmission, the gear rate transmission, but also the drag affects this. So I'm confident that one of the reasons why Toyota is working on removing the scoop is in order to reduce drag. No? It's not normal that they get such high difference in top speed. And if they can solve this before Estonia and Finland, I think they will get some seconds at the end of the event.
It's not hard. The scoops that you say, it's not hard to envision the amount of drag that they would cause. I mean, by their very nature, their very purpose of cooling, they need to funnel air and scoop air in, but that's not ideal from a frontal, drag point of view, is it?
It's always a balance. You have to make the balance and see what you get and what you lose. and try to improve the balance. No?
There's always a compromise.
Yes, compromise. Also, there are another point which is interesting to mention from the current generation. They still have not used it, but I'm confident that they will use it. And is the lamp pot of the Hyundai i20. If you remember, during the Rally Monte Carlo pre-event test, they used these lamps, and they are integrated inside the body. They are not placed on top of the bonnet, which is also an aerodynamic improve, because placing the lamp outside on top of the bonnet is an obstacle for the air flowing over the bonnet. And well, probably the system is not optimized enough, but I'm confident that at the end they will use it. And this is also a nice modification. It's a pity because we all love the old lamp pot of the Porsches and the Lancia Stratos in the 70s and the 60s, no? But Aerodynamics claim for reduction of drag at that area also, no? So this is an innovation that Hyundai has introduced, and I'm confident that they will succeed at the end with it.
Make lamp pods unaerodynamic again. I've got a thing for a massive, ugly lamp pod that does more.
Yeah, again, it's a compromise. But this is something else that it's worth to point out. No?
I'd forgotten about that actually. Yeah, until you raised it.
Would you say it's only a matter of time then before the other teams take a leaf out of Hyundai's book and try to sort of go down that path as well?
I'm sure that they will try. Maybe at the end they will not introduce it because it needs to significant modifications in the body of the car. No, probably it's not easy. It's like modifying the exhaust at the rear. I'm sure that if Hyundai did not modify it, one of the reasons was that it's not easy to modify all the exhaust system. No, you're changing pressures, you're changing flows. It's at the front. Depends on the distribution of the parts at the front of the car. But introducing the lamp pot there, well, it has to be easy. But if it works, why not?
Fair point.
It's going to be fascinating to see how things unfold.
Yes.
Yes.
And on that note, I think it's fair to say that you've certainly left us with a lot to look forward to in what potential evolutions are on this. And we'll definitely have to pencil in a return chat, Lewis, to discuss the changes and evolutions between maybe by the end of the year. And
Yes.
that might be a good place to leave us for now, so we can leave plenty to tease out between now and then.
We need to get him back to talk about Group A aero as well, in comparison to 2-litre aero, 2-litre WRC aero.
Yes, well, it's interesting times ahead, so I'm sure we will enjoy it, and we will see very nice things.
Thank you very much for your time, Lewis. And everyone you need to make sure you check out the WRC Wings website. It's really fantastic. You can lose many, many hours going through that.
Yes, can testify that. We'll put the link to WRC Wings in the show description as well for everyone to follow it. We will have it on the relevant social media posts also. Mm-hmm. So certainly worth your time to give that site a visit, guys.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And it's been very nice to talk with you. And anytime, I'm open to come back again.
That's fantastic. Definitely given me an education tonight anyway. So
excellent. That's the goal.
Thank you very much for your time, Lewis, and we'll certainly have you back on again soon.
Thank you to you. My pleasure.